All right. Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. We have a full schedule of things to talk about. So as we usually do, we're going to start with, in terms of the agenda that Wes posted in the voice chat. We're going to start with just a review, a discussion of existing proposals and drafts that we have in the process. So the most timely one right now is for sure KIP 25. So would encourage everyone who hasn't voted to head over and vote for that. We've got a decent turnout so far, and I know it's the end of the quarter and people have a lot of other things to focus on, but it would be a big help to have more of a community signal on this. So that is the first one. Second, we still have a proposal on the forum that we've been discussing for a while. So this is about the front end of the process. That one will probably be up for a while as we continue to, evolve and add other components to the governance process. But nonetheless, it would be really helpful to have more eyes on it and feedback on it. And also today we're going to kind of contextualize that and put it in the perspective of other things we're talking about for governance. And then finally, in terms of upcoming, we have a lot. So we've got our quarter end stuff in terms of an extension of KIP 21 that empowers our leadership team. We've got the labs budget coming up. And then there are also quite a few treasury proposals. And I was wondering, Matt, if you wouldn't mind coming up on the stage and telling us a little bit about what we can expect to look forward to.
You can look forward to a lot. there's a lot coming down the pipeline. I'm pretty excited to kind of be releasing a lot of these different things. Should give us coverage and really kind of set some other foundational items. But I kind of posted a couple things there. There's probably other things I can mention, but maybe I'll save them for another day. But obviously, with the whole Bancor situation, we will be looking to withdraw our funds there. We will also be looking to set up a testing wallet. This is something that I don't think I've really announced in Treasure Tuesday or anything else like that, but just want to give our dev team the ability to kind of play around with a little bit more funds while giving the community better insight into what, I guess, different strategies are being developed, and they can kind of follow along. But then again, it doesn't have to rely on our true multi-sig as well as just the whole processes that go into there and kind of potentially dilute the other activities that's happening with our treasury. Because it would look a little weird seeing all these swaps back and forth between different things. So one is set up a different wallet for that, and so we'll be go ahead and doing a KIP. And then another one worth mentioning is just kind of, I'm calling it a small asset. I know there's a different name for it on the actual proposal itself, but really this is just allowing us to have a little bit more discretion around what we do with some of our claimable assets. I think we've had situations where we've been airdropped. Maybe it's 15,000, maybe less, or we have some rewards that have accrued in one of our assets that is not what we're deeming as part of our core or strategic assets that we want to maintain long term. So instead of us having to go through the full governance process just to liquidate maybe a $10,000 liquidity mining reward, this will just allow the treasury team to just kind of move a little bit more nimbly on that front. But again, there's some other things that I could mention that are down the pipeline, but I think these are the ones that are closer to being to fruition.
Oh, nice. All right. Thank you. That's great. So lots to look forward to. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts about any of the stuff we have or that's coming down the pipeline? All right, then moving on. Then the next thing on our agenda is there's been an awful lot going on in terms of governance and proposals and counter proposals over at MakerDAO. And I know Wes has been doing some great research on this. So Wes, why don't you come up and tell us about it?
Yeah, so over at MakerDAO, there's a recent new core unit proposal, which is kind of like a pillar to Maker. And so this one was kind of an oversight pillar to kind of, it didn't really have any, I guess I'll say, it was hard to measure the success of that. And so there's obviously a lot of contention about it in the voting. It didn't pass today. So attached in here, I'll just post it again over in the voice chat. I tried to do a quick synopsis of what it was, how the authors saw this core unit fitting into the current maker structure, and then I kind of did a little bit of analysis on how or if it's compatible to what Rune, the one of the founders, I believe, of Maker, um, has. So I guess quick and dirty. I didn't really see that it was compatible with the end game plan, because it's kind of hard to measure the outcomes of this and objectives and how successful this core unit is. And it's not compatible either with a separation of powers. It's the author of I guess authors of this kind of admitted it overlaps with some other core units. So I didn't really see that it was compatible to this new design that I guess Rune is I guess we'll say pushing for. Um, as far as delegation on the token holders, this new design kind of pushes the responsibility away from token holders into these sub DAOs, I'll call it. There's some pictures towards the end on how Rune kind of sees this, where it kind of minimizes the the token holder interaction. We're kind of just approving some sort of budget, and then these members in these sub DAOs are kind of self sufficient and are kind of financially incentivized to keep going. Now, I didn't get a chance to look into Hasu's recent post on his kind of different framework on what to do with MakerDAO's situation, but from a quick skim I gave, it's just another design structure. So going through it quickly now, he kind of is establishing a constitution and then a council where it's similar pillars, but this council is going to have a different structure. And towards the end, he kind of mentioned it'd be a party design, so I'll have to look into that more and give a more detailed overview. But that's kind of what I've been doing, and feel free to critique this document and give any feedback that you have.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like there's so many things going on at once. Do you have a sense that they're all these proposals are responding to a same sense about what needs to be fixed in the governance, or are they looking at different things? Or it just seems like a lot of really fundamental changes are being proposed at the same time by really big actors in that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Rune's kind of proposal, he really emphasized that Maker kind of got stuck, that it yeah stuck kind of onboarding real world assets, and so his proposal, his mind is to help that with onboarding real world assets, kind of where you're incentivizing some different group that with financial incentives are going to be able to do that. And then it seems like that's a similar approach that Hasu has, um, where, yeah, it seems similar that that's what he is trying to approach as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it seems like there's yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yeah, it seems like they're trying to deal with the complexity of what they have and the complexity of all the different things that they're doing, and um, trying to find ways to carve out pieces that don't have to go through governance, where it doesn't make sense to go through governance, but then trying to maintain decentralization as a balance in that, which is a pretty universal problem that we're seeing a lot of other protocols struggle with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this seems like a almost a struggle for power, where people are trying to
Yeah.
push Maker into what they want it to be. And if to me it seems that if the founder's coming back kind of out of the blue to try and push it in a certain direction, really going to back from the people who have actually, I guess, stayed around and have been pushing it towards their own vision. So
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see. We'll have to see what sort of feedback that Hasu's post is going to get, and then assuming that if that goes to a vote, we'll have to see what the token holders think as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's interesting that the the love proposal, the lending oversight proposal for the oversight body was seen as this very successful vote where they got huge turnout and almost record turnout, I think, for Maker. And yet, if you look closely, it was only 30% turnout.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely the voter turnout was interesting to see. It was also interesting that it didn't really get any really like negative feedback in its actual forum post, and people kind of just showed up at the vote to voice their opinions. So that was interesting. And then I was listening to their kind of governance risk call. It was kind of briefly mentioned. I guess that was before a lot of the opposition for token vote. So maybe it just wasn't worthy enough of a good time slot in that.
that's interesting. Yeah, that is surprising that the the opposition surfaced so late in the process. You would think it would have been earlier. Yeah,
Yeah,
great. Well, yeah, go ahead.
and after I was just going to pass it off to you. This stuff is very interesting, and it's it seems very different kind of structures proposed, and then has so it seems like a really fork in the road, I guess, to see, and yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I'll pass it back to you.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you for looking into that, and we will certainly stay on top of it as it develops. Is there anybody else here who has some more perspective on this, or has a different perspective? Or I imagine there are a fair number of maker and or die holders on the call.
I think one of the interesting things that I think Hasu just mentioned in that latest post is that the lack of a let's say codified and agreed upon vision or mission um, can cause governance to become like this play ball for like whales, especially in a system like theirs where it's like a simple majority voting system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having a mission can kind of safeguard against like some proposals that make it a majority but are to the detriment of like the long-term success of the project, right?
Yep.
So I think that was an interesting thing, and I know that we're already working or starting to work on this, but it kind of underscores that is a very important piece in a governance system, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I was surprised that they didn't have a constitution or a charter.
Yeah, great.
I just find it interesting that, as things evolve, especially in kind of the governance space, I would say that protocols seem to be leaning a lot more towards more kind of intricate, kind of multi-step setups rather than kind of very simple things, like straightforward, say, token weight voting. So, seeing this and the amount of thought and work that's going into it really makes me happy with not just kind of the amount of kind of work and due diligence done around the origin of our governance, but also the iterations we're making on it. A lot of these things that what I would say some of these other governance systems have found to be troubling are things that we've either sidestepped or are not something that is a major concern. But it is just very interesting to see how many elements of or just kind of relatable kind of facets of these new ideas and structures we see inside of our own structure already.
Yeah, agreed. The balance of inputs that we have in ours just becomes more and more important over time. It seems to me, as you see these blow ups, and the logic of it makes a lot of sense, more and more sense. All right, great. Anyone else with any comments on maker or die? Not die, maker, I should say. All right, great. Well, we will, like I said, Wes and I will continue following that. We'll continue looking at it. Oh, Wes, you had something else under current events?
Yeah, I just linked the recent A16Z paper where when I gave a quick read, they kind of just discussed what's going on, and I just thought it might be a good resource for anyone here to look into and see what their opinion is on limits of direct democracy and kind of more represented democracy. Like and it seems almost like they're almost indirectly supporting kind of a council of elected officials.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Great. Yeah, I look forward to reading that more closely. It does seem like people are converging on the question of, all right, we tried delegating, letting voters delegate. That took us only so far, and now we need to think about the next level, which are seem to be these hybrid structures where there are sub DAOs or teams or core units or whatever working within a DAO, and the question then becomes how you delegate and to whom, and these are all things we're working on as well, as Dietz said. Okay, great. Well, we will look forward to reading that. So moving on to the last piece, unless anybody has any other. Well, let me say this: are there any other current events from a governance perspective we should be talking about in ecosystem? There could be a million, but in terms of things we haven't addressed so far. All right. Well, if we need to, we can pick back up with that, and we'll certainly talk about more next week. Wanted to move on to the third part of our discussion, which is talking about governance process. So just to review, in terms of things that are on the forum right now, we have the first step of the process. So how does something become a proposal? And so there's a KIP for that, as well as KIPs for each of the templates. As I said earlier, those are going to stay up for a while as we continue to put out more refinements to the process itself. But your feedback has already been hugely helpful in these workshops and will continue to be. So anything you have to offer in the forum would be fantastic. The other thing is and this is something we talked about last week in terms of tweaks to status on the forum. It's not a huge issue. It's more of a housekeeping issue, but just changing the number of status levels that a KIP can have to reflect whether it's under SOFON review, whether it's voting, whether it's in reconciliation. A lot of those were already there, but we really refined those to just bring them more in line with the process as it exists. And the other thing we're thinking about and proposing is that once a KIP, and this is only for things in the KIPs category, by the way. So once something in that category, once a proposal has had no interaction, no activity for 4 weeks, we're proposing to just move it to inactive status. And anyone can come and reactivate something or write a new proposal or add a comment to it, and that'll bring it out of inactive status. But it's just a way of cleaning up so people can see what's working and what people are active now. So yeah, that, as with everything else, is on the governance process part of the forum, because it's not fundamental like a KIP, and so would welcome comments on that as well. And that's still a little more fluid. All right, so let us get to the dreaded slideshow. So I made some slides for this last part because I really wanted to, it seemed like a good time to step back and set some context in terms of, I think it's this one. No, hold on one second. Set some context around where we are in terms of our conversations about the process and what specifically we want to talk about today. So I've got these slides. Hopefully they're live. They're not, they're just, it's an extension of the ones we had on last week. So, and there's also a link to them in the agenda if you'd prefer to look, but you can see them on the screen. You're not, missing anything. So what did we talk about last week? We went through the stages of the governance process as broadly defined where, and this is sort of a life cycle of a KIP as it is right now. So an idea is developed on Discord and or Telegram. It is then moved to the forum where it is proposed, becomes a formal proposal, and it's refined. Then it moves to the SOFONs for recommendation and then token holders for voting. And finally, we may go into reconciliation and ratification. So just to remind everybody, this is what we talked about last week, was taking these two internal pieces of this and trying to clarify what we want from the SOFONs in order to make sure that every proposal that goes through the process is has as many eyes and as much discussion on it as possible so that we make the best decisions, since that's really our overarching goal. So if anybody has any questions about this, we can certainly come back to it. But what I wanted to move on to next is, all right, we've got these lovely steps and we've got these new sort of status updates on the forum, but what does that mean? And more specifically, how do we get from one stage to the next? So we've got these 4 stages. How can we clarify what it means to go from one stage to the next? So this is actually something we talked about last week, and this is what's on the forum now, is how do you get from the first stage to the second, right? So how do you develop a proposal that is going to be legible to the community, that the SOFONs can review, that has all the information that the community needs, and how is it in a format that's very useful? So that's one thing we've already talked about. That's up, as I said, up on the forum, but then that raises the question of the next transition. So from the forum to the SOFONs, and this is one of the pieces that constantly comes up in conversations with people in the community and with people on the Rook Labs team and people who've been around for a while writing proposals, is that there's, at the moment, a lack of clarity around what this transition is and a fair amount of frustration with it. And so I think it behooves us to really get specific as possible in thinking through how this could work. And there are, of course, a number of possibilities. So I'm not sure we're going to get to any conclusions today, but I wanted to start this conversation. So some initial things that we can think about here. First of all, there's a question around how long does something stay on the forum? So we've just talked about if something's inactive after 28 days, maybe it becomes an inactive post. But nonetheless, if something's active and someone's proposed it and it's sitting on the forum, how do we know how long it's going to take? What kinds of expectations can the proposer have and can the community have about how long it's going to take to get to the SOFONs? I think another natural question is, who kicks off that process and what is that process, right? So a couple of initial thoughts that we're working on internally. Set a time limit for the forum review stage. So how long is something in draft status? And these things can be flexible, but if we set a time limit or an expectation, then maybe that can help things move along. And the other question is specify who invokes the next step. So we've got the red rectangle here with a big question mark. That's the transition. So there's a question around the process itself, but there's also the question of who initiates that, right? Like who gets to say when something moves on. So some initial thoughts here. First of all, I'm suggesting, and this is again just a thought, that we set a time limit for 14 days, unless there are some other circumstances that we want to keep some flexibility around. So it would be reasonable to expect that after 14 days, at the most, barring some change, and that change would likely be the SOFON stepping in, but we can circle back to that. A base expectation would be X number of days. And at that point, it is up to whoever wants to invoke the next step to be able to do it. So that's one parameter. Another parameter is specify who invokes the next step. The suggestion, and this is just bringing us back into line with KIP 0, is that the author invokes whatever this next transition step is. So I have some more on this in terms of specific ways we can go about these, but would love some thoughts on these two pieces first.
Jason, can you flip back from
Yep.
to the previous one?
Yeah.
So obviously there are things that we do regularly that I would like to see included in this. So obviously, discussion at this event here
Yep.
would be one of those steps that I'd like to see. Outside of that, this was something that we had, at the beginning of our governance kind of process hadn't really truly defined, which was when crowd consensus has been achieved,
Mm-hmm.
where it would head to that SOFON recommendation.
Yep.
Maybe there's something to be said about better utilization of the Discord and announcements and driving folks towards the forum itself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still something that was a challenge even when we'd use, say, town hall to talk about it. Not everybody attends specific events or
Yep.
stays up to date on things. So it is. I wish I had a better answer there. But just that element of talking about it in front of the whole community,
Right.
it felt like a very important process, which is why that the town hall was originally created.
Mm-hmm. Great. I'm going to carry that into the next slide. So we've got this. What Dietz has very astutely pointed out is there are things that are still missing when we think about just saying, okay, the author can decide when we go into the next stage, right? So if we're assuming community consensus, then how are we going to measure it? How do we know if we have community consensus? And also, once the author says they want the next step, then what is that next step, right? What's that look like? And so these are some options that some of which reflect current practice, some of which reflect aspirational practice, some of which are just here to be here. But these are ideas, these are possibilities that we can talk about, and maybe we can combine some of them, or maybe we can take things from what we're already doing, as Dietz said, in terms of adding in more an explicit requirement for something to be discussed at X number of weekly workshops. That's something that can be blended in here as well. But we can think about a couple of options. One is we open, we end the community review period once the author asks for it with an open meeting. So this is basically what we're doing with the town hall, where there's an open meeting for the community to pose questions and objections. Another option would be to do a temperature check, like some other protocols do, to gauge community sentiment. A third option could just be the author decides and it moves immediately to SOFON review. And then option 4 is the SOFONs decide, right? Since we're talking about moving from forum to the SOFONs, maybe it should just be up to the SOFONs to decide. And of course, there are potentially infinite other possibilities, but to Dietz's point, each of these have benefits and downsides that we can talk about. And maybe talking through these benefits and downsides can help us find our way towards something that we want in combination, or perhaps it's none of these. Perhaps it's only one of them. But so to your point, Dietz, this top option was basically, the town hall like we have it now. So the benefits is it's established practice. It's certainly in the spirit of rough consensus, but then the transition isn't defined, and we're not sure how representative, if if attendance is constrained to being there, how do we know it's representative? In some ways, we might think about mitigating that or allow the community to submit ideas at a poll. I'm not sure. The second option is having a poll or a vote. So the author, after the 14 days, is able to request a poll or a vote. So this has a lot of benefits, right? It's objective. The community can signal affirmative support instead of being limited to the objection voting. It could surface some objectors, although I was really interested to hear Wes's point about this last Maker vote, where Maker actually does this, and yet it also didn't surface the objectors once it went to a vote. So, maybe that's not such a benefit and it's not a meaningful one. But the downside is obviously there's a huge attack vector. Is it even meaningful, or how can we make it meaningful? And if we do it on Snapshot rather than on the forum, then aren't we limiting participation to just token holders? Right. And so there are a couple of ways we can talk about fixing those, but just, wanted to put this out there, and just maybe we could talk through whether we think any of these are, the author decides. Well, let's talk about that one. So that one is aligned with KIP0 and Spirit, but actually has no measure of soft consensus, no community input, and it's, doesn't leave us much better off other than making sure everything moves more quickly through, I would argue. And if we just have the SOFONs decide, then we have a lot of the same problems, with the benefit, though, that we can stop malicious proposals. And I know people have been, we should talk about whether we want everything to go to the SOFONs or whether there should be some point in the process where something can be blocked. So, for example, I was surprised to see today that in Maker's protocol, their governance facilitators can stop something pretty early on in the process, I think from going to a poll, if they feel that something is damaging. So having the SOFONs decide at this point could give us that ability. So maybe that's something worth mixing in. But yeah, so Deet, since you made a lot of these comments already, I was wondering if you could speak to this. Like, are there viable paths you see forward that could combine these, or are there things we should avoid, or what's your take?
So the path of best utilizing the SOFONs seems smartest to me. It also circles back to the level of activity and responsibility that we'd be expecting from them.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, as we look at that role, that's just something that we would tack on, would be my thought. Thinking about the author deciding doesn't necessarily make sense to me, as I feel like if you're writing a proposal, there's inherent bias on that. Polls. I agree to your downside stuff completely. Especially if we do any kind of temperature check officially through Snapshot, and then that's not exactly what happens. In the result, I can see people being pretty upset about that. And so yeah, that's where I would lean, is getting the SOFON more involved in that process, getting them more involved earlier. It would require them to, first stay, up to date on everything that's happening on the forum, every day / week. And it would also lead to, hopefully more participation in these earlier discussions, which I think would be beneficial. So, a mix of a meeting and the SOFON being around or a SOFON or multiple SOFONs being around could be an interesting path forward. I just don't see a solution that uses polls and voting or the author themselves deciding. I personally can't visualize a good solution with those two.
Gotcha.
But obviously that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. No, and it's certainly aligned with. I mean, remember last week we're already thinking about asking the SOFONs to be much more visible and active on the forum stage.
Right.
So they should already be engaged at that point.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, because I feel like I know way too little about what's really happening with you guys. So I have the benefit of fresh eyes and I have no idea what really makes sense. I was
Great.
curious about the potential attack vectors. I mean, obviously there's Sybil stuff. So I went to your forum and one thing I noticed, it looks like you guys are using emails and not Discord for authentication. Not that it still couldn't have that attack through both systems, but I found that interesting and wondered if it's Sybil attacks that is the concern there in terms of.
Not the only one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there others that you can speak to, or is it better not to speak to them because that opens up more possibility for them happening? Because I'm just trying to learn here.
No,
Yeah,
I think
we should speak to
great
them.
point. Jason, you mind if I hop in on this one?
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So, around the origin of, getting the governance set up and everything, a lot of the things that we thought about was around protecting privacy of individuals, which is, the same way that we hadn't, at that time hadn't been choosing to use something like a collab land or something to verify token holders here in Discord. It was kind of the same way of allowing for semi or fully anonymous feedback on the forums as well. And I think that was just a choice that was made back in September or August of last year. Thinking about that now, it would be interesting to use Discord as as the verification instead of an email, which would kind of streamline the ability to give feedback or kind of continue a conversation across multiple venues. But yeah, I think it's an overall good point to bring up.
For what it's worth, too, just to share information, I know that we're not doing it because we're using SAS Discourse, the forum. But if you are hosting your own Discourse, I know there's a plugin to literally sync roles and the groups that are on the forum if that's desirable.
That is great. Thank you. Yeah, that's a big help.
For somebody who just has the outside perspective and a leaning to the attempts at decentralization, I would want to see, and I'm not saying it makes sense in your guys' environment at all, meeting and poll vote, just because there's something about how our biology is wired where I think meetings for people who care really matter, even if you don't agree with the person necessarily. And that's really valuable in terms of creating stronger community. And this is where the stuff that was being spoken yesterday, I don't even remember. It's all blurring together. I'm getting too in the cryptoverse here, but around clear community vision, right? Because we're so used to organizing as social creatures, but that only is going to work successfully when there is a clear vision that all participants are more or less buying into. right? Whether it's a family, a club, a county, a state, a nation. And so the things like meetings actually, because we're so mediated in the cryptoverse, help A, bring out the tensions which you've been experiencing, and B, also create alignment over time as those processes are consciously worked through. And the poll voting, if you have an active community, and that's the hard part in crypto, because even active communities seem really small in the level of participation relative to what we think of in voting in IRL. But the benefits there, I think, are pretty appealing and make it more attractive to people participating in community without having to be like full on core participant, that like they have some influence on what's really going on. And I get the value and wisdom of Sophon, so I'm not trying to detract. I'm just presenting another perspective.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, it does seem. I mean, to be clear, there's no proposal here to do away with any of the meetings we currently have. So the idea isn't to get rid of any of the meetings. So those will still be here. But it's hard to get away from the idea of some kind of poll or some kind of way for people to. It would just be not like rough consensus is really, really important, but community consensus is harder to gauge. And rough consensus among people who come to the meeting is, there's an argument to be made that we can sense that and we can figure out a way forward with that, but community consensus is much harder to measure. And if we're looking to the community to have consensus, then that maybe argues for a different set of tools than we're currently using, or maybe adding to them.
So one of the problems I have always had with finding consensus in the meetings is that there's no way for, or at least we're not tracking whether the participants are actually token holders and actually have like the best interest of the DAO in mind. I mean, that's kind of like a hard thing to say anyway, but like we saw that with the convex kip, that there are a lot of people that came in, but they were just driven by their own like curve war agenda. Isn't there shouldn't there be a way to, when we discuss governance stuff, to kind of, I wouldn't say close it off, but keep in mind, or like make it become transparent who is actually like holding Rook and who isn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important to um, have that differentiating factor to see, or I guess get a glimpse into what your motive, or what the speaker's motives are. Because if we don't have that, then there's this mystery of what's this person's intent. Are they a good actor? Are they something else? I totally agree. I think that's very important to establish. I guess who's a token holder discussing and who's not.
I think it's a great idea, and we know several communities do that, and you can use like a collab land or a guild, whatever, to literally give roles based on wallets showing that they have tokens, right? So straight from wallet to Discord roles to forum, all that can be really clear if it's set up.
Yep. And then just to kind of add, that's actively being is integrating, or I guess giving the option to integrate your wallet to give whatever different color to differentiate your voice from someone else. So I that's yeah. So I agree with you. That's kind of easy to implement, and it is being implemented, and I'm looking forward to seeing these, making sure everyone here is a Rook holder.
I was gonna say too, because I can like sometimes want to like make sure the I's are dotted right and crossed, the T's are crossed. It doesn't having the token doesn't show intent, but if somebody has token, especially a lot of token, they've got skin in the game. Not the same thing, but just making the distinction.
Yeah, I agree. That is an important distinction, and it would be, yeah. I mean, there's a balance, right? Like we don't necessarily want external people coming in out of the blue on something super contentious, but there's also something to be said for the richness of ideas from lots of perspectives.
Yeah, but maybe, and I'm just thinking out loud, but
Please.
if a proposal is in a later stage where it's less, I guess, about ideation and more about, I guess more about the actual details of the proposal, then maybe that is more apt to then like lock it just a DAO, right? While you want that diversity of opinion, usually, especially like when something is in like a draft stage or like a more formative stage, right? But on the other hand, like it's also in a way not that hard for someone to just buy 10K of Rook if they know that something is going to go to a vote in a few weeks, right? And then they are trying to like support like our governance process, and then later they can just sell, right? So it's not. I don't know if it's as easy as just using Collabland and token gating it, but I kind of want to start us having to think about how we can prevent like any similar governance attacks.
Right.
So that's why I raised it.
So it's definitely not, right? The more complex solution would start including some kind of reputation, which you'd probably track some with like NFTs or in some way. I mean, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm just saying, speaking to like, it makes sense that like anybody can say anything in the forum, but if they're not a voter, you can ignore it completely, right? Or if they're a small voter, then you've got perspective of at least one little guy. But so that's still valuable information. And in terms of attacks, that's what I'm saying. It's not a complete solution at all. But if you remember, the real value is community. So, even if somebody is a whale and they don't participate a lot, but they show up, they're still being part of community. And if they got a lot of skin in the game, they care at some level. And there's different ways of trying to, as human beings, pay attention to like who is being motivated in a way that's actually showing an interest in the community, whether it's purely for greed or because they have other intrinsic motivations. And I definitely have my biases. I'm in Orca Protocol, so we talk about humans being what's the right verbiage here? Anyways, the one of the composable units, right? I'm totally brain farting. I apologize, but my point is that it's non-trivial problem for sure, but part of it is recognizing how you learn to recognize who is and is not really community.
That is, yeah. That seems like it's the core of this, right? Well, while we're on the subject of token holders and commitments, one idea that's been bouncing around is thinking about now that we're moving away from boosting our staking, tying governance to staking. So making staking part of participation in token-based voting. Would that be aligned with this notion of having skin in the game?
Yeah, I think it's clear it would. I'm not sure allowing stakers to vote would
Mhm.
would be better than allowing both X-Rook and Rook holders to stake. That's yeah, it's a very interesting question to to answer.
I don't know enough about your protocol, but the simple solution is just to weight them differently.
Yeah, which is what we're working toward now, for sure.
I think I misinterpreted your question when you first raised it, which I thought you said that only people that participate in governance, maybe through voting, have a right to make the
Sorry, yeah, no,
protocol.
it was a poorly stated impromptu question. What I was really saying was, you know, is there a value to limiting participation in voting to people who stake their Rook with us? And I think I made a good point about weighting them differently. That's we're working on a plugin, hopefully with a community grant in the near future to do that. But there is the broader question of having voting be conditional on being staked.
It unquestionably shows a greater commitment to the community, at least for, some fixed amount of time.
I think it'll probably be an improvement, but there will likely be some edge cases that I don't know. Will there be?
If it were easy, there wouldn't be a lot of us in a lot of different communities like working on how to make it work.
Yeah.
We'd just all be doing it.
It's true. And I think in this particular case, it's a point that Dietz has made many, many times as we think about staking. We just don't have the data to know who's been doing it for how long and what their motivations are and what staking is going to mean just for Rook in general as we move into this next stage. All right. Well, that I think we have a lot to think about as we move forward, and we'll think about things that we're going to bring back to this forum in our next session. But I think this has been a really robust conversation. Is there anything anyone would like to add? We have our last piece of the agenda that I want to make sure we had time for, which was if anybody has any open issues or KIP suggestions or things they wanted to bring up that we didn't have a chance to discuss already. So I'm going to open the floor to that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating. We will be sending out a summary of the call and a brief summary of that as Dietz started with Treasury Tuesday yesterday. So that should be coming out in the next day. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And we'll